The acknowledgements always arrived within 4 days. This was the thing Ascheveln found most difficult to account for, not the silence. Silence was what you expected when reports were being managed, when the institution receiving them had reasons to contain what they said. Silence she could have worked with, could have used as evidence of something. But the acknowledgements arrived promptly. They were correctly formatted. They thanked her for her continued diligence. They noted that the information had been received and would be incorporated into the family's regional assessment at the appropriate interval. The appropriate interval. She had been reading that phrase for 6 months and had not yet determined what interval it referred to. She worked for the Draschen family's Eastern Territories Administration out of a timber frame office in the expansion settlement of Verdenmeer, which was the Bone Shore's southern frontier colony and its most honest mirror. The place where the distance between the official account of how things were going and the actual account of how things were going was shortest, because Verdenmeer was close enough to the boundary that the distance was measured in meters rather than politics. She handled grain yield data, route security reports, and the specific category of documentation that covered the Eastern Farm Ring's condition and trend. The trend had been going in one direction for 8 months. She had written her first report in the early spring, when the Eastern Farming's yield figures came in at 11% below the prior year's numbers. And the route security log showed a pattern change at the boundary that her predecessor, who had retired abruptly in the 7th year of what was described as her plan to retire in the 10th, had apparently begun to document before deciding not to continue. She had read the predecessor's incomplete notes before she filed the first report. She had filed the first report with the specific care of someone who understands that accurate reports are the most important thing she can do and the most uncomfortable thing the institution receiving them will experience. The acknowledgement arrived in 4 days. Diligence noted. Assessment interval pending. She filed a second report in the late spring, then a third in summer, then 3 more through the autumn as the boundary pattern change became more consistent, and the farming's southern section began producing yields that required explanatory notes she did not have good explanations for. 6 reports, 6 acknowledgements, no questions, no requests for additional documentation, no indication from the family's Orvatha administration that the assessment interval had arrived or that anyone had been assigned to follow up. She sat at her desk on a morning in the cold season with the 7th report half finished in front of her and thought about what the acknowledgements meant. They were not ignorance. She had considered ignorance and ruled it out. The formatting of the acknowledgements was too specific, too consistent to be the product of a routing system that had not read the content. Someone had read the content. Someone had decided that diligence noted was the correct response. Someone had decided this 6 times across 8 months, while the Eastern Farming's numbers continued to move in the direction she had been reporting on. She thought about her predecessor, who had begun the documentation, and then retired at year 7 of a 10-year plan. She finished the 7th report. She wrote it with the same care she had given the first 6. Accurate, specific, sourced to the data she had access to, neither minimizing what the data showed, nor extending beyond what the data could support. She wrote the summary in the same language she had been using across all 6 prior reports, which was the language of someone whose job was accuracy and who intended to keep doing her job accurately, regardless of what the acknowledgement suggested about whether accuracy was welcome. She sealed the report. She sent it through the family's standard administrative courier route. She began a personal copy in the ledger she kept in her quarters. She filed another report. Outside the timber frame office, Verdenmeer was going about its morning. The market, the children running the routes that children in frontier settlements ran because the routes needed running. The wall watched changing shift at the eastern posts with the specific efficiency of people who had been doing this long enough to have made peace with the view from the wall. The view from the eastern wall was not the same view it had been 8 months ago. Everyone on the wall knew this. Asha Veln knew this. She had been reporting it for 8 months. The acknowledgements, as always, arrived in 4 days.